Wyoming Territory, 1872. Laredo was nothing more than a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the frontier's edge, where the wind carried whispers of opportunity and loneliness in equal measure. 21-year-old Lillian Rose stood at the edge of the town's social, her emerald green dress a stark contrast against the rough-hewn walls of the meeting hall. Her chestnut hair was pinned up with careful precision, a few rebellious curls framing a face that most would call beautiful, though none had bothered to tell her so tonight. "You look lovely, Lily," her father had assured her before departing to discuss cattle prices with the other ranchers, leaving her alone with her false smile and the growing certainty that she didn't belong here, or anywhere. The fiddles played a lively tune while couples twirled across the wooden floor, their laughter rising above the music. Lillian pressed herself against the wall, clutching her dance card, empty save for her own neat handwriting on the cover. 6 months in Laredo, and she remained as much a stranger as the day they'd arrived. A lady of refinement has no place on the frontier, her mother had warned before succumbing to consumption back east. It will break you. Now, watching happiness unfold before her like a scene from someone else's life, Lillian feared her mother had been right. The West demanded grit and calluses, not the poetry and piano skills she'd cultivated in Boston. What good were proper manners when survival required shooting straight and riding hard? The whispers followed her everywhere, the Eastern girl with soft hands and impractical ideas, the motherless daughter who dragged her grieving father away from civilization, the outsider who spoke too properly and knew nothing of ranch life despite living on one. "You'll find your place," her father had promised when they first arrived. But tonight, as every eligible bachelor in 3 counties managed to look straight through her, Lillian accepted the truth. The frontier was no place for someone like her. She'd remain forever watching from the sidelines, too refined for the wildness of Wyoming, too tainted by the West to ever return east. The music paused, and Mrs. Henderson announced a waltz. Couples formed on the dance floor, while Lillian contemplated the appropriate moment to slip away unnoticed. That's when the doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of cool night air and the tall figure of a man Lillian had never seen before. The conversations dimmed as heads turned toward the newcomer. He stood framed in the doorway, his broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, and even from across the room, Lillian could make out eyes as blue as a summer sky. The stranger removed his hat, revealing sandy blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends. He couldn't have been more than 25, his face cleanly shaved save for the hint of stubble along his strong jawline. Unlike the other men present, whose Sunday best often hung awkwardly on frames more accustomed to range work, this cowboy wore his formal attire with natural ease. Sheriff Miller approached him, and Lillian strained to hear their conversation. The name, Preston Keller, drifted across the room, followed by something about the Double Cross Ranch to the north. The newcomer's gaze swept the room, pausing momentarily when it reached Lillian. She quickly looked away, heat rushing to her cheeks. The music resumed, and couples began to dance. Lillian fixed her eyes on the floorboards, counting the seconds until she could reasonably excuse herself. She was so focused on maintaining her composure that she didn't notice the approaching footsteps until polished boots appeared in her line of sight. "Pardon me, miss," came a voice like warm honey over gravel. "I couldn't help noticing you haven't danced yet this evening." Lillian looked up into Preston Keller's face, momentarily struck speechless by the kindness in his eyes. "I'm Preston Keller," he continued, extending his hand. "New foreman at the Double Cross. And you are?" "Lillian Rose," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "My father owns the Crescent Moon Ranch. Then we're neighbors of sorts." His smile revealed a small dimple in his right cheek. "Would you honor me with this dance, Miss Rose?" Later, Lillian would wonder what possessed her to be so bold, but in that moment, the words escaped before she could reconsider. "Why me? There are plenty of suitable dance partners here." Preston's expression softened. "Because you're standing alone while wearing a dress clearly made for dancing. Because your eyes tell a story I'd like to hear. And because I know what it's like to be the stranger everyone's watching but nobody sees." He offered his hand again. "One dance. If you find my company lacking, I promise to return you safely to this wall." Lillian hesitated only briefly before placing her gloved hand in his. "One dance, Mr. Keller." As Preston led her onto the floor, Lillian felt the stares of everyone in the room. The whispers followed them like shadows, but for once, she didn't care. When Preston's hand settled respectfully at her waist, and he guided her into the waltz with unexpected grace, the room seemed to fade away until there was nothing but blue eyes and the steadying presence of his hand against hers. "You dance well for a cowboy," she observed, surprised by how easily they moved together. "And you're surprisingly light on your feet for someone who was holding up that wall so diligently," he countered, the teasing warmth in his voice drawing an unexpected smile from her. "Perhaps we both contain unexpected qualities, Mr. Keller." "I'm counting on it, Miss Rose." The dance ended too quickly, but instead of returning her to her solitary position, Preston offered his arm. "Would you care for some punch?" Something shifted in Lillian's carefully constructed world that night as she and Preston talked by the refreshment table. She learned he'd come from Texas, hired by the aging owner of the Double Cross who needed a foreman with both cattle knowledge and business acumen. "I've been drifting from ranch to ranch since I was 16, Preston admitted, "learning everything I could. The Double Cross is my chance to prove I can run more than just a cattle drive." "What makes you so certain you belong here?" Lillian asked, the question carrying more weight than she intended. Preston studied her face. "I'm not certain of anything in this life, Miss Rose. But I've learned that belonging isn't something you find. It's something you build, one day at a time." Before Lillian could respond, her father appeared, his expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity as Preston introduced himself. "Keller," her father repeated thoughtfully. "Any relation to James Keller, who ran cattle in the Panhandle?" "My father," Preston confirmed, a shadow crossing his features. "Though I haven't seen him in 8 years." An uncomfortable silence fell until Lillian's father nodded. "Well, the Double Cross is lucky to have you. We should talk soon. I've been considering expanding our herd, and I could use advice from someone who knows Texas longhorns." The invitation, the first her father had extended to anyone since their arrival, startled Lillian as much as Preston's appreciative response. "I'd be honored, sir. Perhaps next Sunday after church?" The moment marked the beginning of something Lillian couldn't yet name. As Preston escorted her through 2 more dances that evening, she felt the weight of her isolation lifting slightly. When he finally bid her good night, promising to call properly the following week, Lillian found herself contemplating possibilities she'd long since abandoned. But as she watched his tall figure disappear into the night, her mother's warning echoed in her mind. The frontier breaks the delicate and the refined. And despite Preston's kind eyes and gentle manner, he was undeniably a product of this harsh land, a man who'd survived by being stronger than the elements and more determined than failure. "He's just being polite," she told herself, retreating behind the protective walls of her certainty that Wyoming held no place for her heart. Nothing more. 3 days later, Preston Keller appeared at the Crescent Moon Ranch, hat in hand and determination in his eyes. "I need to speak with Miss Rose," he told the surprised ranch hand who answered his knock. Lillian was in the kitchen, flour dusting her apron as she attempted her 4th batch of biscuits that week. Her previous efforts had been disastrous. Too hard, too doughy, too burnt. Today's batch looked promising until she turned to find Preston standing in the doorway, an amused smile playing at his lips. "Mr. Keller." She hastily wiped her hands, mortified at being caught in such a state. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "Clearly," he agreed, his eyes taking in the flour that somehow covered not just her apron, but also her cheek. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I have a proposition that couldn't wait." Lillian raised an eyebrow. "A proposition, Mr. Keller?" "Not that kind," he clarified quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. "A business proposition of sorts. The Double Cross owner's wife is arriving next month, and the house," he hesitated. "Yes. It's in desperate need of a woman's touch. I've been living in the foreman's cabin, but the main house has been closed up for years." He met her eyes directly. "I hear you brought furnishings and knowledge of proper Eastern households with you. I'd like to hire you to help make the place presentable." Lillian stared at him. "You want me to redecorate the Double Cross?" "I can pay," he added quickly, "and provide transportation. It would just be a few days a week until Mrs. Patterson arrives." The offer was unexpected and unexpectedly appealing. Since arriving in Wyoming, Lillian had struggled to find purpose beyond her unsuccessful attempts to manage her father's household. "Why me?" she asked, echoing her question from the dance. Preston's answer was simple. "Because you have the skills I need." Then, with a glance at the biscuit dough, he added, "Though perhaps we should keep you away from the kitchen." The teasing remark startled a laugh from Lillian. "These will be perfect," she declared, even as she doubted her own words. "Is that so?" Preston stepped closer, inspecting her handiwork. "The last time I saw dough that sticky, we were using it to patch holes in the bunkhouse walls." "You're hardly encouraging me to accept your offer, Mr. Keller." On the contrary, his voice softened. "I'm being honest with you, which is rarer than gold out here. Now, will you help me or not?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to acknowledge. Helping Preston meant stepping beyond the boundaries she'd drawn for herself, risking failure in yet another arena. But refusing meant retreating further into her isolation. "Yes," she decided suddenly. "I'll help you." Preston's smile transformed his entire face. "Excellent. I'll arrange everything with your father and return tomorrow with the wagon." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "And Miss Rose? Those biscuits are burning." Lillian's cry of dismay followed him out the door, along with the unmistakable sound of his laughter. What began as a business arrangement quickly evolved into something more complex. 3 times a week, Preston arrived with his wagon to transport Lillian to the Double Cross, where they worked side by side to transform the neglected ranch house. Under Lillian's direction, dusty rooms were aired, furniture polished, and curtains hung. Preston proved a willing student in the matters of household management, watching intently as Lillian explained the proper arrangement of a formal dining table or the correct way to store linens. "My mother would have appreciated your attention to detail," he commented one afternoon as they inventoried the sparse kitchen. "She always said civilization was measured in small courtesies." "You never speak of your family," Lillian observed, carefully recording the number of serving plates. "Other than mentioning your father that first night." Preston's expression closed. "Not much to tell. My mother died when I was 14. My father took to drinking and gambling after that. By 16, I was on my own." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Preston's voice was neutral. "It taught me self-reliance. Out here, that's more valuable than any inheritance." The statement reinforced Lillian's belief that the frontier shaped men like Preston into hard, solitary creatures. Yet there was undeniable tenderness in the way he ensured she always had fresh water while working, or how he'd fashioned a footstool when he noticed her struggling to reach the higher shelves. These contradictions confused her, especially on the afternoon when an unexpected thunderstorm forced them to remain at the Double Cross long after they would normally have departed. As rain lashed against the windows, Preston built a fire in the newly cleaned hearth and produced a dusty checkerboard from a cabinet. "To pass the time," he explained, setting up the pieces on a small table. "Unless you'd prefer to discuss paint colors for another hour." Lillian accepted the challenge, surprised when Preston proved to be a formidable opponent. As they played, conversation flowed more easily than ever before, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, and dreams they harbored. "I want to make something lasting," Preston admitted after Lillian inquired about his ambitions. "A ranch of my own someday, perhaps. Somewhere I can put down roots after years of drifting." "Is that possible for someone in your position?" The question wasn't meant to be unkind, merely practical. Preston considered the checkerboard carefully before making his move. "The West is full of men who started with less and built empires. What about you, Miss Rose? What do you want from life on the frontier?" The question caught Lillian off guard. She'd spent so much time focusing on what she'd lost, her mother, her home in Boston, her sense of belonging, that she'd never considered what she might gain. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "I came here because my father needed me after Mother died. I never thought beyond that duty. And now," Lillian met his gaze across the board, "now I'm beginning to wonder if Mother was wrong. If perhaps there is a place for me here after all." The air between them charged with unspoken possibility until a loud crack of thunder startled them both. The storm showed no signs of abating, and concern creased Preston's brow. "We can't travel in this. Your father will be worried." "He knows I'm with you," Lillian replied, then blushed at the implications. "That is, he trusts you." Preston's expression grew serious. "That trust matters to me. I'll sleep in the bunkhouse tonight. You can take the main bedroom. The linens are fresh, thanks to your efforts." "But what will people say?" The question revealed more of Lillian's Eastern sensibilities than she intended. They'll say Preston Keller had the good sense not to risk Miss Rose's life in a flash flood. His tone brooked no argument. Your reputation will survive, I promise. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed listening to the storm, Lillian felt something shifting within her. The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving, but it also contained unexpected moments of beauty and connection, like finding Preston Keller standing before her at the dance, offering his hand when no one else would. The storm passed, but its effects lingered in subtle changes between them. Preston began calling at the Crescent Moon even on days they weren't working at the Double Cross, often bringing small gifts. A book he thought she might enjoy, wildflowers he'd spotted on the ride over, or once, memorably, a kitten he'd rescued from a coyote. She needs a home, he explained as the tiny calico creature curled in Lillian's palm. I thought you might like the company. Lillian named the kitten Penny and found surprising comfort in the animal's affectionate presence. It was the first living thing in Wyoming that seemed genuinely pleased by her existence. As weeks passed, Lillian's father remarked on the changes in his daughter, her increased confidence, her willingness to engage with ranch matters, and most notably, her improved cooking skills, courtesy of Mrs. Patterson's old recipe book that Preston had discovered at the Double Cross. That young man has been good for you, her father observed one evening. And for our relations with the Double Cross. Did I mention he's arranged for us to purchase 20 of their yearlings at a favorable price? Lillian hadn't known, but she wasn't surprised. Preston had proven himself consistently thoughtful in both personal and professional matters. The day before Mrs. Patterson's scheduled arrival, Lillian and Preston stood in the transformed main house, surveying their work with satisfaction. Fresh paint brightened the walls, polished furniture gleamed in the afternoon light, and vases of wildflowers added touches of color throughout. It's perfect, Preston declared. You've worked miracles here, Lillian. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. We did it together, she corrected. I couldn't have managed without your willingness to learn. Preston moved closer, his expression serious. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned before. Lillian's heart stuttered. Yes. Mr. Patterson has offered me a partnership in the Double Cross. If I accept, I'll have a quarter ownership now, with the opportunity to purchase more shares over time. That's wonderful, Lillian exclaimed, genuinely pleased for him. You're achieving your dream. Part of it, Preston agreed. But there's a condition attached. What sort of condition? Preston hesitated. Patterson believes a ranch needs a woman's presence to truly prosper. He wants me to find a wife within the year if I accept the partnership. The words landed like a physical blow. Of course, Preston's increased attention, his visits to the Crescent Moon, his efforts to engage her father, they weren't born of genuine interest, but practical necessity. He needed a wife to secure his future, and she was the most convenient candidate. I see, Lillian managed, pride forcing her voice to remain steady. And you're telling me this because I value honesty between us, Preston interrupted, taking her hands in his. And because I want you to understand that my decision has nothing to do with Patterson's condition. Confusion replaced hurt in Lillian's expression. What decision? I'm declining his offer. What? Why would you do that? It's everything you've worked for. Preston's thumbs traced gentle circles on her hands. Not everything. I won't be pressured into marriage, even for a ranch. When I take a wife, if I take a wife, it will be because I can't imagine life without her, not because a business agreement demands it. Relief flooded through Lillian, followed immediately by shame at her quick assumption of his motives. But your dream can wait, he finished firmly. There will be other opportunities. The moment hung between them, charged with words unspoken, until the distant sound of an approaching wagon broke the spell. Preston released her hands reluctantly. That would be Mrs. Patterson arriving early, he said, stepping back. I should go greet her. Lillian nodded, suddenly aware that with Mrs. Patterson's arrival, her role at the Double Cross, and perhaps in Preston's life, had reached its natural conclusion. Of course, I'll gather my things. As she collected her belongings, Lillian confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. Somewhere between polishing furniture and playing checkers during a thunderstorm, she'd developed feelings for Preston Keller that extended far beyond friendship or professional respect. feelings that had no place in her carefully constructed belief that the frontier offered her nothing but isolation and hardship. Yet as she watched Preston welcome the Pattersons from the window, his easy competence and genuine warmth on display, Lillian couldn't deny that her heart had betrayed her most fundamental conviction. Despite her best efforts, she'd fallen in love with a man whose life was irrevocably tied to the very land she'd been determined to reject. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt strangely like coming home. 2 weeks passed without word from Preston. Lillian told herself this was to be expected. He had responsibilities at the Double Cross, especially now that the Pattersons had arrived. Still, his absence left an emptiness she hadn't anticipated, a hollow space that even Penny's affectionate purring couldn't fill. When Preston finally appeared at the Crescent Moon, it wasn't to see Lillian, but to discuss business with her father. She glimpsed him from the kitchen window as he rode in, his tall figure as straight and confident as ever atop his bay gelding. Pride kept her inside while they talked, though curiosity burned like wildfire. Only when her father entered the kitchen an hour later, his expression thoughtful, did she permit herself to ask about their visitor. "Preston's leaving," her father announced without preamble, heading north to Montana Territory within the week. The news struck like a physical blow. Leaving? But why? What about the Double Cross? Patterson hired his nephew to replace him. The boy lacks experience, but blood counts for more than skill in some men's ledgers. Her father shook his head. "It's a mistake, if you ask me. That young man is worth 10 nephews. "Did he say where in Montana?" Lillian asked, struggling to keep her voice even. "Some outfit near Helena, needs an experienced foreman. Pays better than the Double Cross, apparently." Her father studied her face. "He asked after you. Said he'd call tomorrow to say goodbye properly." The words "say goodbye" echoed painfully in Lillian's chest. Preston was leaving, taking with him the one meaningful connection she'd formed in Wyoming. The one person who saw beyond her Eastern manners to the woman beneath. "I see," she managed, turning back to the stove to hide the tears threatening to spill. "Will you be needing dinner soon?" Her father's hand settled gently on her shoulder. "You care for him." It wasn't a question, but Lillian answered anyway. "It doesn't matter now, doesn't it?" Her father's voice held a warmth she hadn't heard since before her mother's death. "Lily, I've watched you these past months. You've changed, grown stronger, more confident. That young man saw something in you that I'd forgotten was there. Something your mother and I always hoped you'd discover for yourself." "What's that?" Lillian asked, turning to face him. "Resilience. The ability to bend without breaking. To find beauty even in harsh circumstances." He squeezed her shoulder. "Your mother was wrong about the frontier, Lily. It doesn't break the delicate. It reveals the strength within them." The words struck at the core of Lillian's deepest fears. Could her mother, whose memory she'd honored by clinging to Eastern ways, have been mistaken? Had the real barrier to finding her place in Wyoming been not the land itself, but her own refusal to adapt? Before she could formulate a response, her father continued. "Preston asked my permission to court you formally. Should you be amenable?" Lillian's heart stuttered. "He what? Asked to court you?" "Said he'd wanted to establish himself first, make something of his position at the Double Cross before approaching you." Her father's expression softened. When that opportunity collapsed, he immediately secured another. "The man's determined to build something worthy of offering you." "He's leaving for Montana," Lillian pointed out, confusion warring with hope. "For now? But he mentioned homesteading possibilities near the Helena outfit. Good land available for those willing to work it." He paused. "He asked if I'd consider allowing you to visit my sister in Helena come spring, should things develop between you." The implications overwhelmed Lillian. Preston hadn't forgotten her or dismissed their connection. He'd been planning, working, trying to create a future where they might build something together. "What did you tell him?" she whispered. "I told him that my daughter makes her own decisions." Her father's eyes crinkled. "And that I've never seen her happier than when she's arguing with him over the proper way to organize a pantry." The next day, Preston arrived as promised, his usual confidence tempered by an uncharacteristic nervousness. Lillian met him on the porch, her heart racing as she took in the sight of him, hatless in deference to the occasion, his blonde hair catching the afternoon light. "I hear you're leaving," she said without preamble. Preston nodded. The Patterson situation changed unexpectedly. "So I understand." Lillian folded her hands to keep from reaching for him. Montana is very far away. Not so far as Boston, Preston countered gently. And not forever, if things go as planned. What things would those be, Mr. Keller? A hint of his usual smile appeared. We're back to Mr. Keller now? After all we've been through. You tell me, Lillian challenged. You disappear for weeks, then announce you're leaving for Montana without so much as a letter. What am I supposed to call you? Preston stepped closer, his expression growing serious. Call me yours, Lillian, if you'll have me. The directness of his declaration stole her breath. What are you saying? I'm saying that I love you. The words hung in the clear Wyoming air between them. I have since the moment you told me my biscuit assessment lacked tact. I'm saying that I want to build a life with you. Not here, not yet, but somewhere we can start fresh together. In Montana? Lillian's voice wavered. For now, the foreman position there pays enough that I can save for land of my own within a year. Good land, Lillian. The kind where a man and his wife could build something lasting. Preston took her hands in his. I know it's sudden, and I know I'm asking you to leave everything familiar again. But I promise you won't be alone this time. You'll have me always. Lillian stared at their joined hands, overwhelmed by the choice before her. Could she leave Wyoming just as she'd begun to find her place? Could she follow this man to yet another frontier, trusting that his love would be enough to sustain her through whatever hardships lay ahead? The answer came with surprising clarity. The frontier had never been her enemy, her own fear had. And Preston Keller, with his steady hands and patient heart, had shown her that even in the harshest landscapes, beauty and connection could flourish. Ask me properly, she whispered, meeting his gaze. Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands in his. Lillian Rose, I love you more than I thought possible in this life. Will you marry me, follow me to Montana, and build a future together? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes to all of it. Joy transformed Preston's face as he rose, pulling her into his arms with a restraint that spoke of his respect. When his lips finally met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss, Lillian felt the last of her doubts dissolve. This was where she belonged, not in Boston or Wyoming or Montana specifically, but wherever this man who had crossed the dance hall to find her decided to build their life. They were married 2 days later in a simple ceremony at the Crescent Moon, with Lillian's father and the ranch hands as witnesses. The bride wore her mother's lace veil pinned to her chestnut hair, and the groom's blue eyes never left her face as they spoke their vows. 3 days after that, Preston and Lillian Keller departed for Montana territory, their wagon loaded with her books, his tools, and a small calico cat nestled in a basket of linens. The journey was long and often difficult, but each evening as they made camp beneath the vast western sky, Lillian discovered new strength within herself and deeper layers to the man she'd married. When they finally reached the Helena Ranch where Preston would work, Lillian faced the scrutiny of the owner's family and the ranch hands with a confidence that would have astonished her former self. No longer defined by what she lacked in frontier skills, she instead offered what she uniquely possessed: her education, her organizational abilities, and her growing resilience. You're not what I expected for Keller's wife, the ranch owner admitted after Lillian had reorganized the chaotic ranch accounts within her first week. Most Eastern women fall apart out here. I'm not most women, Lillian replied simply. And I didn't come here to fall apart. By the following spring, Preston had secured a homestead claim on 160 acres of promising land 20 miles from the ranch. Together, they built their first home, a modest cabin with large windows that Lillian insisted upon to let in the beauty with the light. On the evening they moved in, Preston presented her with a gift, a small piano he'd purchased with his savings, transported at considerable expense from Helena. Because some refinements belong even on the frontier, he explained as Lillian stared in disbelief at the instrument. And because I want our children to grow up knowing their mother's music. As Lillian's fingers touched the familiar keys, bringing melody into their new home for the first time, she reflected on how completely her understanding of the West had transformed. This land wasn't her enemy but her teacher, revealing strengths she never knew she possessed and offering challenges that, when met alongside the man she loved, became opportunities for growth rather than barriers to happiness. Play something that reminds you of home, Preston requested, settling beside her on the bench. Lillian smiled, leaning against his solid warmth as she began a gentle waltz. "I am home," she said simply. "Wherever you are is home now." Outside their window, the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of promise, while inside, a woman who had once believed herself incapable of surviving the frontier played music for her husband in the home they had built together. Proof that even in the wildest places, love could not only survive but flourish. And it had all begun when no one would dance with her at the town social, until the tall cowboy crossed the room.